My guest today is Brian Mickelson, the Vice President and General Manager for U.S. Public Sector at Datadog. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Let me set just a little bit of context for our discussion. The Office of Management and Budget's 2022 IT operating plan highlighted the need to reduce complexity of systems, bring down costs, and of course use data to drive decisions. Over the years, agencies and vendor partners have made their technology environments, well, I'll say a little more complex than maybe they should have been. More bespoke tools, lack of integration of data, all those challenges that have come up over the last 20, 25 years. OMB has actually pushed agencies toward enterprise services as one way to overcome many of these IT modernization challenges. Of course, there's other opportunities for agencies to become more efficient, more secure, and improve how they deliver services to citizens. One way, the use of end-to-end observability tools. That can help agencies innovate by consolidating the tools that they use, reduce the complexity of those tools, and of course, have visibility across many of their tools across in the technology stack. So for what is end-to-end observability, it's a tough word, we've got to pick a better one. We're going to turn to Brian from Datadog. Brian, start us off defining that for us so folks have a level set.
Yeah, no, great. And I think it means a lot of things to different people, so I appreciate the chance to define it. And what I would sort of say, just from a beginning standpoint, we really talk about it in terms of end-to-end observability and security, but we'll bring that context in later. I think sort of the primary components of end-to-end observability means that, at its baseline, I have the opportunity to observe or monitor any application, any infrastructure, anywhere. And so eventually what that really means in a more modern construct, whether we're talking about on-premise applications in the cloud, on-premise infrastructure or cloud infrastructure, it's full stack, hybrid architecture. Doesn't matter whether it's the most modern cloud native thing you've ever built, or if you've got some long tail legacy things that you've been hanging on to for the past couple of decades.
When you started to go down the path of end-to-end observability is end-to-end, I was almost going to stop you, but thank you for breaking it down for us, because I think the components are key.
Absolutely.
A lot of agencies are going to be living in this hybrid world, so I think that's one of the keys why this is important as we talk about IT modernization. What does it mean if I have some applications in the cloud, some applications in the data center? The idea is that I'm seeing the data. What am I seeing about?
Yeah, so great question, and I think it borders on that hybrid cloud. What is hybrid cloud architecture? And the joke that I kind of tell, and I've been doing this now for close to 3 decades. People will say, we've chosen hybrid architecture, and I think the joke is hybrid architecture chose you.
Exactly.
The reality is that probably more and more things, if we look at the trends, they are cloud native. More and more, government agencies, private sector, everyone's building in the clouds, and you can see it in the large cloud service providers' financials. These things are growing in the billion-dollar clip. When we talk about observability, maybe a different way to think about this will connect the dots kind of between end-to-end observability and hybrid cloud, but maybe it makes sense to start with a little bit more core context around observability. Years ago, Datadog coined an expression, the 3 pillars of observability. When we talk about that in its core context, what we're really talking about is infrastructure metrics. So this is understanding the health of my operating systems, my virtual machines, my containers, all the way up into cloud native. We talk about serverless functions, but it's infrastructure metrics paired with application traces. So now I'm starting to think about, on top of that infrastructure, where am I running my applications, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, but what can I actually see in terms of how my applications are performing? What are they doing from a memory constraints perspective? What's their overall performance? How much lag time is there between requests and actions? And then the third component of that 3 pillars of observability is logs. So it's really, the end-to-end observability part is really this idea that we're creating context for the users of these systems, because historically what they were doing, they might have a best-of-breed solution where they're using one solution for network monitoring, another solution for infrastructure monitoring, all the way up into a myriad of solutions, both vendor and both cloud native and third party, for doing variations of applications, containers, microservices, observability. What Datadog brings to the market, I would suggest, is necessity being the mother of all invention. what started off as a best-of-breed infrastructure monitoring solution in Datadog has grown into this end-to-end observability and security. And what they're really doing is creating the context between infrastructure, applications, and logs. They do that all through eventually just correlation of tagging those things together. So and it's kind of to land this, what's really changed is historically, and still in a lot of cases, when you're using a best-of-breed solution or what was a best-of-breed solution, you'll be looking at a monitoring tool for infrastructure, and you'll notice something's not working right there. You have an application that's not performing the way that you want that application to perform, and so you've got a different tool telling you that. And then over somewhere else, you're collecting all the logs. The real benefit to try and reduce the time to know when I have a problem and to reduce the time to solving that problem is correlating all that information and not having separate teams working in separate tools, all with a separate perspective.
You went through, I really appreciate kind of the three pillars of it. This sounds to me like, oh, okay, I don't work behind the scenes. I work in a program office. I work in, I'm not an IT person. Sure. But this, the way you laid it out is this data is not for the IT person alone. This sounds like it's for anyone who is running an application, understands kind of, oh, maybe I need to call the IT guy or the woman and say, hey, can you help me fix my infrastructure has some latency or whatever it is. Talk a little bit about how this kind of really does flow down and up across the organization.
Yeah, it's a great way to put the question. When we think about what we do in those legacy or historical sort of original best-of-breed solutions, that data might go to one specific team, and that specific team is going to have their own context of a situation, but it's not a context that's necessarily shared from infrastructure, op owners to developers to the security operations center folks. For the way you framed the question is very good, because one of the key characteristics of a more modern observability and security solution, we talk all the time about the cultural changes. And we can get into DevOps and DevSecOps and shift left and all the fancy words, but the real cultural shift is getting people out of individual tools and individual contexts and giving everybody the same view of the same information, so that when we get to, let's just say we're in the process of a Sev 1 issue firefighting mode, I don't want to have 5 tools and 5 teams looking at it from a different perspective. I want one tool with all of the teams in that same tool, folks having the same context, so we're not arguing about what's happening, we're observing what's happening and we're solving for it.
We see this with the single pane of glass. We've heard that around cybersecurity for years, and this seems to go one step further. Is that there's been a big push to reduce complexity? Mm-hmm. Is that just natural evolution of technology? Hey, why do we have 10 tools that don't talk to each other that I have to go to, again, just to your point, you're looking at one pane of glass, I'm looking at another, and we're not communicating. Is this just part of the natural evolution?
Yeah, I think it's if I can break that into two things, talk about the complexity first, and then maybe the evolution of vendor constructs and how that works in the industry. But I think the first thing to talk about is just where we are at, because I think we are. My stump speech, when I'm out there talking about this at scale, is the IT systems that we build and manage have become more complex than at any other time in history. I don't think it's at all a stretch of the imagination to think about just the addition of AI in every technology person's frontal lobe. But 2023 was a massive acceleration of technology and development and use of AI systems. And I don't think it's hard for anyone to imagine. I get almost no pushback when we say the systems have become more complex, and they're becoming even more complex at an accelerating rate. So then the question becomes, what do I do about that complexity? How do I solve for it? And that's where I think the evolution of vendors sort of comes in. I think historically, and my background is IBM, Cisco Systems, 20 years with Red Hat, and then the last couple of years with Datadog. What I've seen in my career is that somebody will start off as a best-of-breed solution if they're lucky, and they'll have a single product. Single product companies want to be able to have 2 or more products, and then 2 or more product companies want to be a platform vendor. done well at scale, vendors like Datadog emerge. And so in our industry, what I think you'll find is we're the largest end-to-end observability and security company in the marketplace. We're the fastest growing in the marketplace. But what that's allowed us to do, the pace of our innovation, it's meaningful. We put roughly 35% of top line revenue back into R&D within the company. What that allows us to do is, I'd say, move the needle on our capabilities faster. So you've got this foundational platform that started as infrastructure observability. It just turns out that that was a very natural foundation to then add application tracing, add logs, add security, digital experience monitoring, the whole 9 yards. And just as like a perfect example, in 2023 alone, Datadog put 400 new features into this observability platform.
I think one of the things that we're starting to see in the government is this push to reduce complexity. So if they can understand what's happening across their environments, I think they can make better decisions. Are agencies starting to go down this path? Is there an example you'd want to show?
Yeah, there's plenty. What I would offer, Datadog we're a SaaS-only delivery model. We're FedRAMP moderate. But that FedRAMP moderate comes along with a significant increase in the number of public sector customers that are able to consume our offerings. So, one specific one I might use for this, you could take something like the USDA's DISC, which is their Digital Infrastructure Services Centers. And I think it's a real good example. We like telling the story because I think it shines us in a positive light. But what it really talks about is the customer had real world problems, and Datadog's observability platform has significantly helped them. One of the things I like talking about DISC is they've got a long legacy tail, right? I think the DISC centers themselves go back into the 80s. And so this is an organization that has had to modernize over time several times. They've had monitoring tools in the past. I think it was in the 21 timeframe when they received a mandate that said they had to do some things that they weren't currently doing around software supply chain management, and just simply around increasing their security posture. So they brought Datadog in roughly in the 22 timeframe. The prime contractor there is EcoSelect. They're the managed service provider. And what EcoSelect's been able to do with us is just a couple of statistics. They had one ongoing problem. It was a memory. It was a memory utilization challenge. I think the way I think about it is it was an executable loop that every time it fired up, it was causing memory depletion. And that same or systematic set of tickets had popped up something in the neighborhood of 700 times in a short period of time. When they brought in Datadog, I'd say the sort of three core things I've seen, they've taken that memory utilization challenge down from 700 plus tickets down to 0 tickets relatively quickly because we were able to show them what the challenge was. On top of that, they were able to bring up I think 95% of their target infrastructure was up and running with monitors and dashboards from an observability point of view within 75 days. And I think I believe that included over 4,000 containers as part of that infrastructure setup. So it's a good example of Datadog both working in the application performance world as well as what we can do in sort of the ephemeral container cloud native modern world.
And we're just about to hit up on break, but real quick, the reason that USDA DISC was able to do that is because they could see what was happening. Previously, they may have been able to see that there was a problem with their memory, but not the end result. And then they'd get a ticket in that said, hey, I can't use this application. It says not enough memory or whatever the rationale is.
That's exactly right.
That's really what's happening here.
100%. I mean, and this goes back to the way I often talk about it, especially given the government and this huge IT modernization challenge that they had. I think it's worthwhile to be very empathetic to the problem that we're solving here, because the challenges we have today they were the solutions 10 years ago, and just the way technology evolves, we've got to keep up with that pace of motion. So it's not that it's not that at one point in time they didn't have what were very modern capabilities, just their challenges and the capabilities of a modern vendor have changed over time. So when we came in, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier. It's that correlation between what's happening at my infrastructure level, what's happening at my application level, and where are the parsing and correlation of the logs that represent the exhaust of all that IT happenings. When you put those three things together, your primary outcomes are reduced complexity, increased visibility, you're reducing the time to detection of issues, you're significantly reducing the time to resolving those issues.
All positive things for every organization, government
100%.
or not. Brian, on that note, let's take a quick break. We'll come back, we'll continue our discussion. You're listening to the discussion, Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. Welcome back. You're listening to the discussion, Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guest today is Brian Mickelson, the Vice President and General Manager for U.S. Public Sector at Datadog. Brian, we talked a lot about what end-to-end observability is, why it matters. Thanks for the example that you gave around USDA and DISC. The reason why we're talking about this today is again, I think that there's a second piece to this. A lot of agencies are being asked through executive orders, through White House memos, OMB memos, to really push forward on cybersecurity, talk about logging. That's an important issue. At the same time, they're also saying, well, how are you serving the customer better? Right. How do you ensure that when Brian logs into my Social Security, you know what your Social Security is, and that application doesn't get overwhelmed and people get frustrated? So these pieces and parts that you talked about really have a longer tail than just, oh, you got to know what the back end is doing. It's really, there's a front end issue as well.
Yeah, great setup. I think that's exactly right, because when we talk about full stack hybrid architecture and end-to-end observability, what we're really talking about is from the network through the systems, operating systems, up through containers, microservices, all the way out to serverless functions. But that's a lot of back-end talk. What we should really talk about is front to back as well, or back to front, because when we talk about, if you take executive order, I think it's 14028. That's the that's the cybersecurity. And then when you talk about 14058, that's citizen experience. They actually play together, but let's break them down one at a time. At the citizen experience level, what we're really talking about here is the digitization of the government's capabilities, especially those forward-looking or front-end experiences where citizens want to take advantage of digital. And the thing I always talk about is the pressure on government is that the digital experiences we have on our phones, whether you're an Apple or an Android user, that's the same level of capability we want to have with our government experiences. The benefit of a solution like Datadog, with as much as I've talked about the back end so far, we can talk about something like digital experience monitoring, or DEM. And when we talk about that, just to get into a little bit of the technology, we're talking about capabilities around real user monitoring, we talk about it in terms of synthetics, we talk about it in terms of session replay, but what a product owner or a digital capability owner really has the capability to do today is they can see the unique experiences that their end users are having. So they can see when a login occurs, they can see what the actual user experience or travel through that application might be. So they can generally understand what's flowing well, where are the bottlenecks, what are the challenges with that customer's front-end experience. And it really goes beyond there. If you think about this from a synthetics point of view, what synthetics allows you to do is proactively understand, is that system is that front-end application, is it up and running the way I want it to? Is it handling requests from various operating systems? Is it working within various browsers? And we can actually set up proactive tests. So even more important than knowing when you have an issue and fixing it is knowing you have it before it's a real issue and resolving it before you have a negative customer experience or citizen experience. And I think this all boils down to, it's the real drive for a lot of our IT mission owners across government is they're in the business of solving for the mission, and a lot of times the mission is improving the citizens' experience with government.
Just want to take a half a step back. You mentioned synthetics. Let's make sure we define that.
Sure.
You're talking about real data that's fake, meaning this is how this would act if these many users hit our system. Yeah. So maybe just give it 30 seconds or so folks don't go, are you talking about robots or alien or whatever?
It's an interesting thing, yeah. So it basically is the automation of test bots and test scripts. So eventually what you're able to do is you can show the system and train the system on what a user should experience, and then the system can tell you if that's not what's occurring. It does that proactively in an automated fashion.
All right, I appreciate that. Just
all good,
because we don't want to get lost in too much of the technical jargon that we do enjoy. You mentioned the CX. Let's jump to the cybersecurity one. I'm glad you know the 14476 where I get lost in all the numbers. But agencies are on the hook to improve their logging. There was a report back in August, I think maybe from the Government Accountability Office, that talked about, hey, a lot of agencies are still struggling with their logging. Talk a little bit about the observability piece when it comes to logs.
Yeah, and I think the number they reported was dismal. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of government agencies are meeting the requirements of the cyber initiatives under 14028. And then there was another update, M2131, which actually gave some clarity on you need to be able to, you need to be able to manage logs, analyze logs, archive logs. And what it's really asking you to be able to do is you need to be able to track issues in real time. You need to be able to hold those logs in storage for, I think, a minimum of 12 months would be the hot storage requirement, and I think 30 months in total. The benefit of an end-to-end observability and security company is that we touch on, we think about logs in multiple perspectives. We can talk about it infrastructure and application, but here from a cybersecurity perspective, now we're really talking about cloud security management. We're talking about cloud SIEM, but this is Datadog's, at the core of Datadog's 3 pillars of observability. You remember I talked about it connects to the logging capability. Datadog has the ability to help governments meet these requirements today. And something we haven't talked a lot about here, but we've talked about complexity. One of the real values of Datadog's approach to all this is we have a tagline we refer to as simple, not simplistic. There are many ways to get those log capabilities. I think one of the reasons why so few agencies have met the requirement thus far is that the legacy log solutions in industry, they're just somewhat complex. Most of them are on-prem. Most of them require some type of advanced query language capabilities, which means you need a specialized team to manage that. Most of that lives in that security operations center. What Datadog does, I think, is bring a fresh perspective on all this. Very high performance from a logging perspective, huge capacity. The volumes that we're talking about here are off the charts, and I'll give you a stat if you ask later. But what it really boils down to is out-of-the-box configurations, simplistic in nature, doesn't require years of background with our logs capability, because it really is a point-and-click and fairly easy-to-use system.
And the benefit of the logging is a cybersecurity piece, understanding, okay, where an attack maybe could be happening. Is there a history of that build up to the attack? And that allows you obviously to secure data, cut it off. Are agencies starting to, how are they getting forward on using logs? What are some of those trends you're seeing? Because again, going back to the GAO report.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the way Datadog looks at this is where AI and ML do come into the picture. So what you're really looking at, just with the size of the volume of the U.S. federal government's logging needs is mind-blowing. And so this is where you have to have AI and ML capabilities. And what they're really helping you do, they're looking for patterns. So they're going to do anomaly detection. They're going to look at common threats and vulnerabilities, and they're going to report back on things like that. They're going to report back on failed login attempts from if you're not logging in from where you typically log in, they're going to highlight things like that. But it really boils down to, how do I connect not just those logs, but how do I connect the logs back to all of the actual events that are happening too across my infrastructure and my applications? So it's the breadth of how do I bring it all together, how do I do it in a simplistic way, and that's really what Datadog is bringing to the table, is a new way to think about connecting logs, infrastructures, and applications.
And of course, the volume of data, the velocity of data, the 3 V's, the veracity of the data, all matters to making these decisions and understanding where your risks are and how to manage those risks. We've talked a lot about the wide end-to-end observability and security is important. When you talk to your agency customers, what's motivating them? What are some of those reasons that they're coming to you beyond? I think we talked simplicity a little bit with the single pane of glass theory, but is there something bigger that's happening?
I think generally they need to get control. I think the challenge that they have, if you think about the tenure of an average senior IT official in the government, they tend to rotate roles on a somewhat frequent basis. Think about how hard it is to really get a true understanding of the legacy architecture, let alone the capabilities necessary to modernize that. We keep talking about complexity, but I think the connection point too is, take a Gartner term like technical debt. If technical debt is the buildup of technical complexity over time, imagine when we're talking about complexity now accelerating. That means your technical debt is, things are getting more complex at an accelerating rate. Your debt is getting more complex. So I think what's really driving customers is how they're doing things today is not working for them. Their teams are having a hard time putting together a formal understanding of the architectures they're trying to support, and they simply need a better way to think about this, and that is what Datadog's bringing to market, a better solution. For public sector, I think it's a real benefit because Datadog's been doing lots of what we do all the way back to 2010, 2012 timeframe. We were kind of born in that same time period just after some of the cloud service providers. The benefit is, 26,000 customers, $2+ billion in top line revenue, growing quickly. The benefit to the government is all of that has led to a very mature capability that now through the FedRAMP process, we're able to bring to the government.
We got about a minute and a half left. I just want to circle back around to the conversation. A lot of agencies say, okay, great, I have to improve my observability, I have to understand my logs better. I don't know where to start. This is overwhelming. There's so many pieces and parts. What kind of advice do you have for potential customers? Or where do they start?
I love it because one of the things I see, and actually take everything I've said, right? I'm talking end-to-end observability and security. That is a endless set of puzzles that we can solve for, and I think boiling the ocean is the exact wrong approach to take. So I think the good news for government here is our advice would be call us, but what we're going to do when you call us, if we're going to talk about this, we're going to go from the commercial of all of the things we could possibly do. It boils down to what's their most pressing issue. Do they have a security concern that they want to address? And we can look at it from that security operations center and the logs perspective. Do they have a particular infrastructure challenge that they want to address? Is there a particular app that's not working the way they want? The way that we work with our customers, we get to some very finite, I want to solve this problem. And frankly, I know a lot of vendors want to come in and try and boil the ocean. Our role is to come in and help you solve a problem. We find when we help you solve a problem, you want to use us more, you want to bring us in to solve the next problem.
It's that small, solve it, continue and build upon it. And
exactly
I think
right.
that works no matter what we're talking about, whether it's observability or DevSecOps or you fill in the blank. Brian, unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So I very much enjoyed our conversation. So let me thank my guest. Brian Mickelson is the Vice President and General Manager for the U.S. Public Sector at Datadog. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Jason Miller, and you've been listening to the discussion Innovation in Government, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search innovation.